Right.
Do I click OK?
Okay. Well, hello everybody, and this is the first episode of the Balkanizer podcast, and we're calling this one Balkanized. Basically, the story of how two Brits of the same age ended up living in Serbia. So we're just sharing our thoughts and experiences about how we got here and what it means to be in the Balkans. So we thought the way we'd do this is trace our own connection with the Balkans. So rather than go into some great autobiographical process, just to talk about our connection with the Balkans from earliest days and how that finally developed into coming here.
Yeah.
So, Charlie, do you want to go ahead? Apparently, for you, it started in the summer of '84. Is that right?
Yes, that's the first time I came to Yugoslavia, as it was called then. And yes, hello everyone. Charles Robertson is the name. And I came on holiday, as I suppose many people did, and still do, to the Croatian coast. Although I was on a longer interrail journey, which ended up in Istanbul, so we travelled all the way through the Balkans. But yeah, my first encounter. One of the things I do remember about it at the time was just
Yeah.
this the fact that I didn't really know where it was.
Yeah.
From I was my late teens, and I'd been through normal British schooling, I
Yes.
suppose, geography, what have you, but I had no real conception of Eastern European geography at all.
Yes. Yes.
So I really didn't know where I was, to be
Right.
quite
Right.
honest. I
Yeah.
don't know what you probably had a better awareness when you arrived
Well,
here.
to be honest, no. To be honest, no. I
No?
mean, I came ultimately via Hungary, and when I went to Hungary, I didn't know anything about it really. And I remember going to the library before leaving the UK just to find out something about
Hmm.
Hungary. So, and it's similar. I mean, my first actually in the Balkans was like I think it was '82.
Right.
That
Hmm.
I was just a teenager, and we did a trip with my my friends, school friends. It was an
Hmm.
interrail again. That was the thing, wasn't it? You could
Yeah.
just ride around without limitation on the trains, and we
Yes.
thought we'd take in Split as well. Actually, funnily enough,
Hmm.
um, so um, that was it. I mean, I don't have very clear memories of it, to be honest. I just remembered,
Hmm.
leaving Italy and going through this huge, endless sort of forested tracts. That's what I struck me about it. Um,
Yes.
and and then Split itself being a sunny seaside place, but really, to be honest, it was, that was the nature of interrailing. It was a bit of a sort of whistle stop tour, just dropping off in a place and heading off again.
Yes,
Um,
well, we'd been to Venice, and
yeah.
yeah, left on the train
All right. Well, it's the
from
same because
Venice.
I was in Venice as well. Yeah. So we were doing the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But you were a little earlier than me.
Yeah.
You must have
Yeah.
been in your
That's it. That's it.
what,
Um,
82. That's before you finished
that's before I finished school.
A-level.
Yeah. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
last summer. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, right. Hmm.
Um, And the other thing was I mentioned when I was thinking about school days was the idea of Serbo-Croatian. And all I remember, it was like
Yeah,
proverbially, this was a difficult language. Serbo-Croatian, it's like sort of joke, he can speak Serbo-Croatian or something like that. So
yeah, yeah.
that was
I don't
about the
remember that
extent
myself,
of my
but yeah.
knowledge of,
Mhm.
what was going
Yeah.
on here.
Well, I remember, yeah, my girlfriend at the time reading the guidebook about Yugoslavia on the train, me
Yes.
having no real idea of where it was. But she was
Yeah.
more
Yeah. Yeah.
studious
Yeah.
in this way, and I remember, yeah, the report of six republics and so on and so forth. Then on the trains, I remember seeing this the names of various different places into two alphabets. So in a Latin alphabet, which I could more or less make out,
Yes.
and then this Cyrillic alphabet, which made me
Oh,
think, of
right.
course,
So that was in
first of all of Russia. Yeah.
Croatia as well, was it? That they had it in?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it was more or less ubiquitous in
Uh-huh. That's
Yugoslavia at the
interesting.
time
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
everything official was presented in two alphabets. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now I
Yeah.
think that when you get dig further down into it, in Croatia it was always um, uh, Hrvatsko-Srpski, and in Serbia it was always
Oh,
Srpsko-Hrvatski.
right.
So
Okay.
you had the two different variants there,
Yeah,
but
of course. Yeah. Yeah.
it it was that first encounter with the illogicality born of, I suppose, ethnic differences, which I had no awareness of. That
Yes. Yeah.
seeming illogicality. Now I understand, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, looking at the notes here, your connection in the 80s was more substantial than mine. So you also,
Yeah.
what happened next in the 80s for you?
Well, yeah. That was my first trip, and then after that, towards the end of my first degree, I was asking myself, what on earth are you going to do with your life?
Yeah.
And I had this urge, basically because I had seen what seemed to me to be a more vibrant and interesting life um, that people led in Turkey.
Mhm.
So that was my basic understanding of the way things were. But actually, yes, before I even started out on that journey, I had another trip through Bosnia, essentially
Oh yeah.
in '87. That was a bicycle ride from Zagreb to Dubrovnik.
Oh right. Well, that's a serious
So yeah,
bicycle ride, isn't it?
it was a fair trip. Yes, yeah. Well, I was early 20s and young and fit, and I could cope with that kind of thing. But yeah, they gave me it was the first time I started trying to learn any of the language,
Yes.
and um, I can still remember the first poem I learnt in Serbo-Croat. It was "Teach Yourself Serbo-Croat" was the book I was working from,
Okay.
and yeah, I learned this little verse as part of the
Okay. And you
course
say,
there.
and you say you spoke to people and you already picked up on some of the history talking to the kids when you were swimming.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the on the administrative line between the Republic of Croatia and the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Right.
So it's the River Una, which comes down through Bosnia and down joins the Sava
Yes.
at a place which is infamous,
Right.
Jasenovac.
Yes. Oh, so you sent about. So that's where. Oh, right. Okay. Well, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm. So it was at that stage, and it was really on all my stops. There was this um, sense that I was encountering three at least different communities.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I wasn't quite clear myself about what the boundaries were between the Christians, but you could tell by name that they were also Muslims there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
um, yes, it was in swimming in the Una with some local kids of my own sort of age that
Right.
I'd run into there, and one of them was telling me about how we're swimming in these waters now, but 40 years ago there were bodies floating
Yes.
down the river.
Yeah. 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 So
I
people.
didn't know whose bodies there was
Yeah,
supposed
you
to
didn't
be,
understand the actual story behind it. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
story behind it. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
was the first sort of introduction to, and I think the kids I was talking to, this was in some ways perhaps new information for them as well, because it was at the time after the death of Tito that things were beginning to these um, ethnic differences were becoming more pronounced, and people were beginning to talk again about the um, the ethnic conflict which was going on as part of the Second World War,
Yes.
um, that that was what being what re-examined, I suppose, by people at the time,
Yes.
and finally talked about, because I think for a lot of the time through the time of at least while Tito was alive, these things weren't talked about very openly.
Yeah. Okay. So they came up again at that point. Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's an important topic which we might touch on a
Yeah,
bit later again.
yeah. We'll
Um,
come back to that.
what
But yes, how did
about,
you start? Yeah,
well, I mean,
let's
for me, I
send it
have to
over to
jump.
you.
We have to jump. So
Yeah, yeah. When
I'm
we're
just
leaving the
looking here.
80s and
Maybe, yeah,
heading.
you could talk about your
Mm,
Turkish language and marriage, and then we're sort of into the,
great. Okay, we'll keep it chronological. Yeah. So
yeah,
my
yeah.
history is a bit longer. Yeah. Well, yeah. I went to Istanbul after I'd finished my first degree. I was already enrolled on this course on what they called area studies. So it was modern Turkish history,
Okay.
politics, and there was a language element as well. So I thought I'd start trying to learn Turkish, and I enrolled on a language course in Istanbul in that would be the summer of 88. 88, yeah, I guess it was.
Yes.
And I started at Yabancı Diller Okulu. It was called
Okay.
the
So what's your level of
foreign
Turkish these
language
days?
school.
Can you still
Uh,
converse in Turkish?
Minimal, no, no, no. I
Uh-huh.
tried. I try occasionally with the local cafe owner who's Turkish, set up a cafe here, but I've forgotten nearly everything I have to say.
Yeah, yeah. It's just, need to
If you
use
don't
that.
use it, you lose it. Yeah, as we know. It's a pity, and I love the sound of Turkish. It's always been
Yeah, it's a fascinating sound, isn't it?
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and the way the language is constructed and everything. But it was, yeah. I guess just life led me in a different direction because when I
Yeah.
was in Istanbul, I met a Yugoslav girl and
Yes.
ended up marrying her a year later and being taken back to Belgrade.
Okay.
So I,
So your
um,
life in Belgrade started in 89, is that right? That's when you started.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, essentially. We did because she was studying Turkish as well. So we did a little brief period in Istanbul before that. But
Yeah.
various different work related reasons, we ended up coming back to Belgrade and
Yes.
wondering what to do with ourselves. And teaching English offered itself as the first and most obvious thing to do. So there's my wife was an English graduate as well and an English teacher. So
Is that when you
we
set up a school? Because there is a school in your name. Is that when
yes,
it
yeah,
started?
that was pretty much when it started. Yes, yeah, 1990. It
Wow.
was a period of quite rapid liberalization in what was still Yugoslavia at the
Yes.
time, and we rented a flat and put out some ads and started getting a lot of students who were very
Yes.
interested in studying with us
Right. Right.
because it was new and interesting. Yeah. But that was 1990, and pretty quickly the political situation began to sour quite badly, of course.
Yes.
And um,
So the first war, 90 to 92, yeah?
yeah, yeah, yes, I put it down as my first war. Thankfully, I had no direct personal experience of it,
So
but
it was happening away from Belgrade, basically, wasn't it?
it
So,
was happening away from Belgrade, but not very far away. I mean,
right.
the Bosnian border, of course, isn't that far away.
Yes.
Vukovar was one of the main points of most bitter conflict in
Right.
that side
Right.
of the war. And that's literally I don't know whether it's 100 kilometers away from here, but
Yes.
really quite close on the Croatian
Okay.
side of the Danube. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, and there was financial issues as well, apparently.
yeah. Well, at the same time, we had a sort of a currency collapse. What would we
Hmm.
call it? Essentially, it was that we'd been saving money in Deutschmarks. I have
Yes.
an abiding affection for the Deutschmark. I was very upset when they replaced it with the euro, because it was such a factor of stability in our lives at that time.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Right.
but we had made the mistake of keeping our Deutschmarks in a Serbian bank, and we weren't uh, we weren't stopped from taking them out. It was just that we had to take them out um, in dinars,
Right. Yeah.
which meant at the official exchange rate, which meant that we lost more or less half their value. So
Really. Really. Yeah. Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
uh,
And then, yeah, you
that
went, and
first
after that, you went to
experience.
the UK.
We did, yeah, yeah. We spent a couple of years in Britain. Well, more or less until 1995, in fact. So
Yes.
92 to 95. My first son was born in Serbia in 91, but the second son was born in England in 93.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and yeah, so we were there for a while. But yeah, the pull of the Balkans was always there, and
Yes.
um,
Okay,
we
well, we could just
decided to
sort of,
go back.
yeah,
Yeah,
you were sort of in the thick of it, and we'll return to that. But I guess
yeah,
just at my point, I was just like the typical, my knowledge of the Balkans was still a typical British level, I guess.
hmm
I remember this is the mid 90s, and I
yeah,
remember, like in one workplace, and it was in the news, the Balkan conflict. And I was
mm,
like, I don't know, for some reason I was, pushing the sort of, the pacifist line, not the pacifist, but the peace. Why is the British Army?
hmm
What are they doing? So I was
hmm
questioning
hmm
involvement. And I remember some guy just saying, oh no, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's like, okay, just whatever. So that was I just remember that conversation, that this guy
hmm
he didn't care about what it was.
yeah,
Um, and also in connection with that, I remember I think it was a bit later, some guy, because my career was going nowhere in particular. I remember one guy saying, "Oh, well, you want to go out to the Balkans? You want to go out and get involved? You could." So it was
many
like
did. Yes,
so it was
in
like
all sorts of
some
capacities.
idea of get fame and fortune by doing something out there.
Mm.
But I
Well,
didn't.
I don't remember it, but there was, and in some ways, it presages what happened with Ukraine now, with
Yes.
um, people being more or less invited to come out as mercenaries. So they were
Yeah.
British mercenaries fighting in Vukovar. There were other people as well, aid workers in particular, people who were organizing on a more or less ad hoc basis with trucks of
Yeah.
supplies
Well,
to
I
take.
I just found out my cousin
Yeah.
actually. He was a British Army officer at one point,
Mm,
but um, he was he said he was working with the Red Cross there. So I just found this
yeah.
out recently, just now.
Mm,
So yeah, people were there. So that I guess that what was suggested to me, but I didn't, it didn't even occur to me as vaguely serious in my case anyway. And the other thing from that period is I remember literature about what you just mentioned, these, the concentration camps and so on. And it was a
mhm.
controversial, so taking one side of that argument. But that was something that I knew it was on my sort of radar from that point of view.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's about it for me about that period, really, just some sort of awareness of the conflict and but little interaction with it. So I think we should
yeah.
turn to you, which the next one on your list is 95 when you went back, and it at the time of Operation Storm, apparently, when you went back.
That's it, more or less. Yeah, that was the sort of August of 95, if I remember correctly. I'm just going on memory on that one,
Yes.
actually. I haven't checked the dates, but yeah, yeah, that was about the time. Yeah, so while we were uh, driving back down from the UK through Europe
Oh, right.
in our little Yugo Corral, me and my
Oh,
wife
really? You drove
and
all that
two
way?
kids.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've driven that route many times, but we were coming down through Hungary,
Went through
getting
Hungary,
hopelessly lost in Budapest at some ungodly hour of the night.
yes,
It,
I can imagine.
I don't know whether it was like
But
that
it's
when
all,
you
yeah,
were
you can
there,
go on
but
the M0 now goes round the outside.
now it's fine. Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we got we found ourselves in the middle of Budapest and we couldn't see a single street sign anywhere. No directions
Okay.
anywhere. But yeah, that was that. But yes, so we arrived back there more or less at the same time as
Okay,
a
so that
large
means
wave
that
of
refugees were
Serbian
coming
refugees.
coming into
Yeah,
Belgrade.
yeah,
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 a lot, I should think. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. The
Okay.
the Serbs from Krajina,
Yeah, a lot of them
from
came
the
had to come back, didn't they? Um,
well, they were indigenous essentially of that
yeah, that's
region
right.
of
Sorry, I
Krajina.
misphrased
Yeah,
it. They were
yeah.
there and they were
So
they were sent
the
out. Yeah.
Orthodox people, Nikola Tesla is from
Yes.
that region,
Yes.
from Lika and other towns and cities in that what used to be the border region between the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yes.
It is
Yeah.
called Kraina, which is a word related to Ukraine. Yeah,
Yeah.
border region.
Yes.
It's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
borders, the borderlands, and
Yeah.
but a lot of the Orthodox peoples of the Balkans who had fled Ottoman.
Oh, right. They were that was how they came to be
They
there.
had
Yeah.
settled as a sort of um, a warrior people on the borders to help protect um, the Austro-Hungarian
Uh-huh.
Empire
Okay.
from
Okay.
incursions from the
Right.
Ottoman Empire. It's very much a feature of this kind of this place. Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's
this
it. So
road.
lots of fascinating history. Just so my little bit, I come into a bit more detail now because
Mm,
97 was when I left the UK. I moved from London to Hungary, which is not generally seen as a Balkan nation. The only sense in which I think it is if you draw a line from the northernmost tip of the Black Sea to the northernmost tip of the Adriatic, it actually
mm.
goes through the south of Hungary. So you could say that that sort of part of Hungary has a sort of Balkan influence in it to some extent. Um, but just a bit of geography is generally the Balkans is defined as if you take the line of the Sava and the Danube and the sort of mountainous, hilly region, which is to the south, all the way down to Greece, of course.
Yeah,
Just that, and but of course, then politically, the nations which are either in that or are straddling that, like Serbia straddles that, modern Serbia and Bulgaria straddle it.
yeah. Well,
Um,
personally, I don't have any problem including um, Hungary and the Balkans. I mean, in some sense, that is what the great powers did in Versailles in
yes,
1919, isn't it? They included a large chunk of what was the Austro-Hungarian Empire
yes.
into Yugoslavia and the part of Serbia
Yeah,
which
well,
you
that's it. That's it. So it's, I think on a
live
political
in.
level, the word is flexible, so,
Yeah.
but the sort of geographical idea of a hilly region or a forested region, has a sort
Hmm.
of geographical identity. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so,
So yeah. You moved to Hungary. How long did it take you to learn Hungarian? Because to my
well,
mind, that
yeah,
sounds a
I mean,
much
this
more
is one of my
complicated
little
language than
topics,
Serbian.
because I could speak
Mm.
Hungarian. I learned it in about 3 years, something like that.
Right. Right.
And Hungarian is billed as this super difficult language.
Hmm.
But I'm, having now struggling with Serbian, having been here for 8 years and still, not much beyond a sort of A2 type level.
Right.
Um, it's what I say is that, okay, the reason people are sort of afraid of Hungarian is because it's lexically different. It's
Yeah.
an
Yeah. Hmm.
Asiatic
That's
language,
sort of
and
my
yeah, it presents you with these unfamiliar words that just you can't link to other European words.
mhm.
Um, but once you've got through that, you do have to learn a lot of sort of odd vocabulary.
Yeah.
But once you've got through that, the grammar is so much simpler than, for
Right.
example,
Right.
a Slavic
Right.
language like Serbian, because you
Hmm.
don't have case in
Hmm.
Hungarian, and you don't have gender. So all
Right.
relationship
Right.
is
Hmm.
expressed basically by suffixes. So you just have to know the
Hmm.
suffixes, but that is a much more simpler operation than learning, 42 different. That's my calculation. If you have cases
Yeah.
42, you've got 7 times 3 times 2 is 42. So I say to people about Hungarian, just push through that lexical bit,
Hmm.
and then you'll find the grammar is very manageable.
Suppose that was partially the issue with Turkish as well. I mean, the huge vocabulary load at the beginning,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean, my
manipulative
personal
in the same way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my personal non-expert view is that there is some sort of linguist because I think Turkish uses suffixes, isn't that right? That
that's correct. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So for
Hmm.
me, it's
Yeah.
closer. That I see some sort of connection there with Hungarian.
Yeah, I've heard people say that there is, and I've heard that people with other arguments. Yes, but
Yeah.
on
There's
the
all sorts
face
of
of it, it
arguments
sounds
about it,
pretty
but for
similar.
me,
Yeah.
that's from my personal experience. The fact that I
Hmm.
see those suffixes, that's a sort of some sort of link.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And I guess I need to bring in at this point the sort of religious side because that my own
Yes.
background, yeah,
Hmm.
I sort of I studied theology and religious studies at university, and it's been a lifelong interest. reading the Bible, journeying around, going to the Far East and India and so on. So that's been an interest with me. And the reason the connection with Hungary is that in the mid 70s, sorry, the mid 90s,
Hmm.
I was going to Speaker's Corner in London, and I
Yeah.
was preaching. It was sort of in the company of a nonconformist group in central London. And that's how I met my first wife, who's Hungarian. She was on sort of holiday, basically, in London, an English teacher, so she was like picking up the language.
Right. Right.
And
Hmm.
so that, that eventually, after, she'd come to London two or three times, she invited me to go to Hungary, and that's how I
Hmm.
ended up there.
Do you
Um,
think there's a sort of a similarity between Hungarians and Serbs in the sense of the socialist legacy there?
Yeah,
Do,
I
do, have,
think, yeah, that there is because of the size
Mhm.
of the country, there's a common experience of the socialist era. I mean, the overall
Mhm.
historical background is very different, you know.
Yeah, of course. Hmm.
But in recent history, there are parallels, and I remember a Hungarian student of mine saying, yeah, they had a good time. They were hobnobbing with Serbs in some situation. Yeah, sort of shared
Hmm.
sort of negative experiences. Actually, they were talking about that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
So so definitely parallel there.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's what brought me to this part of the world in the wider sense. Um, and um, it was 99, I guess, which was the next big connection with
Yeah. Yeah.
so because
Hmm.
that's when I saw, that's when Serbia came really into my attention because the planes were flying over Hungary.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember seeing on the TV like a house which looked just like the house round the corner, the typical
Hmm.
build in this part of the world, which presumably was in northern Serbia somewhere.
Yeah.
And this had been bombed, and I was like, "What? What's going on here?" It's like it's bombing the kind of house which is in my neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like sort of, I guess you could say, radicalized by this. My whole notion of what NATO is and everything was challenged and everything.
Hmm.
And I guess for
Yeah.
you that was even stronger because you were right underneath it all. So perhaps you could tell us about that.
Well, it was. Yes, it was certainly. Yeah. Yeah. It was my first and most significant radicalization. Yeah, I think when you you hear what back then, I think that the media space in the UK was much more much more open than it is today. To be
Yes.
honest, I think
Hmm.
there was space for voices who were very critical of the whole NATO campaign against Yugoslavia.
Yes.
One of the principal ones I remember is Robert Fisk, working at the Independent, who's a
Oh,
journalist.
really?
He
Hmm. Hmm.
died recently, but he actually came to Serbia and asked Serbs what they thought, which was
Right. Right.
um,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
which
So
went against
now,
the
so that
narrative.
was, but now it's only sort of independent people who are giving any sort of other side of the story, would you say?
Well, yeah, yeah. I think there's well, I guess we can leave
Yeah,
that
that's another story, isn't it? Yeah.
it's another
We
story, I
did.
guess. Yeah, yeah.
That was the
But I
point
mean,
of I was
back in
thinking.
'99, that was certainly the radicalization.
Yeah. So, but perhaps you could say a bit about being underneath all that because you were there when this happened. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was there from the 24th of April when the bombing began
yeah,
until the 18th of May,
right.
which was so 10, 15 days before they finished. So
Yes.
we, my wife and our two sons at that stage,
Yes.
we fled Serbia on a bus to Budapest. Essentially, we
Okay.
in on the 18th of May.
Right.
Well, I say fled. I mean, we had we were running a summer school, an English language summer school in Britain. So we had commitments there that we had to meet. So
Right. Okay.
I was very keen in many ways to stay in Serbia. I didn't want to leave
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
because I was very much a supporter of the Serbian resistance to the NATO bombing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that's a natural process. But what was it like here? Well, it was difficult to sleep at night.
Mhm.
Very Most nights I think we spent awake. Um, there wasn't very much in the way of media coverage in Serbia of what was going on. There was only, I
Yes.
think it was Radio Pančevo. That's Pančevo's, you know where it is, of course,
Yes.
the city near to Belgrade. But it was the only source of information of what was going on. And we'd see the anti-aircraft flak over the skies, occasional missiles, and so on. I
Hmm.
remember once I saw, yes, this it must have been some kind of a NATO aircraft because we had blackouts more or less all the time,
Yes. Yeah.
and there was a big bright moon, and this NATO fighter jet shooting across it,
Oh, right. Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think they bombed Belgrade, parts of Belgrade, quite thoroughly,
Yes.
and I on a number of occasions I went along, the day after on my bicycle to see um, uh, what um, what was left.
Yes.
There was one particular bombing I remember in Zemun, which impressed me the technological um, um, uh, uh, what's the word? Uh, how technologically advanced these projectiles were, because
Yes.
you could see on the roof of the building there was a little sort of a like a door onto the roof,
Yes.
and the tomahawk or whatever it was had gone in through that door
Yes.
down into the middle of the building and exploded in the middle.
Really. Really.
It,
Yeah.
and I heard the rocket engines of these things on a number of occasions, and it was that combination of um, extraordinary technological expertise
Yes.
to such a barbaric goal.
Yeah.
It 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 looked to me like a kind of madness, and I hadn't really understood um, the madness of war and
Yes.
the craziness which actually underlies that.
Yeah.
But how seemingly normal people can hold those two things in their heads. They can concentrate on making their rocket absolutely marvelous
Yes.
in what it can do for such
Yeah.
an evil goal. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. Yes.
So yeah, lots of dreams of billowing smoke. I remember that. Huge clouds of this acrid. When a building burns, it burns badly. It's not like a bonfire in your back garden. It's that sort of stench of all sorts of carcinogenic uh,
Yes.
um, stuff going up into the
Of course.
atmosphere.
Yeah.
Um, and those I remember some quite vivid dreams like that haunted me for a number of years afterwards. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So again, that's a big one, that topic.
mm,
We're sort of running out of time
we're running out of time, and
for
we
this
haven't got very
episode,
far, have we? Yeah,
so
yeah.
just
How did you
round
come
up.
to end up? Yeah, I mean, because you moved from Hungary to Greece. That was the first step,
Yeah,
and that
yeah. So
really is
that was
the Balkans,
really
isn't it? Yeah.
the next decade. But that's how I came to
Mm-hmm.
be here, really. So it was jumping over Serbia, in fact, to
Mm-hmm.
Greece.
But you went essentially to my mind to the real heart of the
Well,
Balkans,
that's
which
it.
is
That's the historic.
Mhm,
That's where it all started, isn't it? Really,
mhm.
as a civilization.
And that was something that occurred to me while I was reading through your biography again. I mean, Athos, to some extent, is the spiritual heart of the Balkans, right? Would you
I
say?
would
Would you
say
agree?
so. I would say,
Yeah.
from our point of view, anyway. Um, so that's a very interesting story of how that worked out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but what we could do, we've probably got enough material for another episode on that. So
I
as
think you
we
probably
cut
have.
off that,
Yes.
we'd sort of reached about 99, 2000,
Mhm.
and we'll carry on from
Well,
there
shall we leave
for
it at
the
that for
next
now? And
episode.
it's
Yeah,
been very interesting
yeah.
chat. Yeah.
Okay.